The most requested topic I have yet to cover about Dragon of Icespire Peak is how to roleplay all of its many characters. So I had a friendly chat with Fred from How To D&D, who made videos about how to roleplay every character in Lost Mine of Phandelver to brainstorm a few of the best ways you can bring these characters to life. Here we go. Hi, Bob here, and welcome to Bob World Builder, where we learn how to have more fun playing D&D together. Sometimes with special guests like Fred, who I also recorded a video with for his channel. So check the description to see the other half of our conversation about keeping your characters alive. And if you haven't yet, be sure to subscribe for new D&D guides every Wednesday. So, Fred, maybe you could start us off with one of the first critical characters in Dragon of Icespire Peak, which is actually the Manticore at Umbrage Hill.
Oh, the Umbrage Hill Manticore. Frankly, I think reading the monster manual is going to be more useful to you than reading the adventure in terms of what to do with that Manticore. They do have a couple of lines that sort of say, try to talk to the Manticore. Talking to it is great if it's going to work, but I don't feel that's going to be the go-to for a lot of players. What does this Manticore want? It needs to be healed because Adabra's got potions, right? Hopefully she can help it out. Maybe it needs a place to stay. It's no longer got its nest, and it's got a spouse who may be pregnant and about to have babies, which in fact is what I did in my own game. They moved in later on. That caused a whole lot of different problems because apparently even if you get rid of the Manticore, she decides that it's the best idea is just to fix my door, repair the windmill, and I will stay here because I'm all safe. Don't need to worry about orcs, don't need to worry about Manticores or dragons. Just leave me be. I will be fine. The Manticore makes more sense than she does. Clearly, she has been smoking a lot of mushrooms because she's out of the tree.
She is an apothecary, so maybe there are some strange fumes in her windmill. So a major take-home point for the Manticore, for Adabra, and really for any character, player or non-player, is to figure out what they want. Once you know their motivations, you can more easily decide how they're going to act to get what they want. But let's talk about a character whose actions and behavior were pretty annoying to many players and DMs, and how to fix it. But another character that we see throughout this adventure, and I guess the issue is that we don't see him, that I know a lot of my viewers had issues with, is Harbin Wester. So he's just shut in his house, I'm pretty sure. I don't think he's actually in the Townmaster building, and he just talks through the door no matter what, slips the gold pieces under. Somehow he must sneak out in the night to post new stuff on the job board.
Look, I did a video on Harbin Wester for the Lost Mine of Phandelver, and sort of a breakdown of that character is there. He's a character which, frankly, I never liked, but I didn't really want him to be the main quest giver, which is what he's set up to be. Is like every quest is, the job board. So I never had Harbin Wester go anywhere near the job board. My group are actually the constables and deputies of this location, since there's no law in town. So they go to his door constantly asking us, is there jobs that pay? What have you got for us? And he will just slip a letter underneath the door and give them the next job. So they don't actually go to the job board as such. I try to look at some of the other NPCs and figure out which ones made more sense to be delivering that particular quest. And I love this idea of ditching the job board and using multiple NPCs as quest givers, because it forces us and our players to practice role-playing. Whether they overhear rumors or seek out characters with more info, it gets them talking with different characters around the town. So let's talk about some of these characters in Phandalin. A number of them show up in Lost Mine of Phandelver as well, and maybe how we can use these recurring NPCs a little better in the module. So I guess for me, many of them are incredibly boring characters. In fact, I could swear that some of these characters live down my street or in the town that I live in. Okay, I don't know, in a fantasy adventure. Yeah, I thought in a fantasy adventure we would have fantastical. Frankly, I don't think there's an awful lot of them that are worth recycling or reusing. The Stonehill Inn, the NPCs there, good. Bath and Provisions makes an awful lot of sense. I'm happy for them to retain Harbin Wester, maybe not quite in the same aspect as before, in which she's literally their go-to every single time. I think the idea is to pick the ones that the players will constantly interact with and give them some meat, like the Lost Mine of Phandelver did, which is give them a lead into. So once they sort of interact with them, how can I make them more important? Because right now they're not very important, other than I want to go shopping, or I need to get the next quest, or maybe I need a little bit of information, or maybe I need somewhere to stay because I don't like tents, so...
I agree. As I was taking some notes for this video, I ended up jotting down the names of somewhere near like 20 different NPCs that show up in this. But there are some interesting characters that they come across. Like, I really think Big Al at the farm was kind of a fun character who they can meet, and they save him, and so maybe he decides to come to Phandalin or restart a ranch closer to Phandalin since he lost all his workers and livestock anyway. Like, he would be someone interesting to have around, and he's kind of an ally too, because he's a decent fighter. And say for him, I really leaned into the like Wild West aspect of Phandalin in this region and reused like a southern accent for him in my game, the best I could do anyway. So that was just the one aspect of his personality that I like took out and just kind of blew up for the sake of trying to make it fun for my game. That point really can't be overstated. Taking one funny or curious trait of an NPC and heavily exaggerating it to give them personality. Don't get me wrong, this method will definitely create one-dimensional, often stereotypical characters, but they will grab your player's attention and be easy to form relationships with because they're just easy to understand, and some will absolutely become your party's favorite NPCs. So, without going through every NPC, because we're not going to do that, what are maybe one or two NPCs who your characters gravitated toward, or who you really liked in this adventure, and how did you make them shine?
So it's funny you should say that. I guess the one character in the entire adventure that my players really liked was actually the giant crab that has no name and very little information on, really. And I called him Wally because I was sitting there and I had started spending a lot of time just writing out everything I thought I would need to know about every NPC. I was thinking of Wally DM, and it just popped into my mind, and I started describing him. His name is Wally, and they had a conversation with him. They became best mates. That was one NPC that really stood out for them. And then I guess the other one, Big Al, never made it, mate. He died in my game. But they loved his hat, and they still wear it to this very day. The centaur, Xanth, they loved that character so much. It died, and they decided to get it raised from the dead. So those are the characters that stood out. There was plenty of information on Falcon, but it wasn't really a character that they really sort of gravitated towards, because it's yet again another human, and he's still, he's got a drinking problem, but that's about it.
Is that canon, or did you create that?
I don't know. I think I was reading between the lines. I was like, okay. He likes a bottle of wine, and there's some. It was. Oh, true.
No, I'm pretty sure it's in there that if the characters bring him wine, I don't know who tells him that, but if they bring him wine, he'll let them stay for free, something along those lines. But and I'll throw in that Grace also definitely loved the crab the most out of everybody in this adventure. And let's be honest, the crab was everyone's favorite character. Give this video a thumbs up if you agree. It's cute, it's silly, and as Fred pointed out when talking about Falcon, who's another boring human, non-humanoid NPCs are naturally going to stand out. This is why my players are loving all of the awakened beasts and shrubs in Icewind Dale Rime of the Frostmaiden. Just like Icespire Peak, I have a whole video series for that module, with one-page PDFs for each video available to all supporters on Patreon. And this summer, I am going to turn all of my Icespire Peak videos into Patreon PDFs too. But check it out today for more great resources like my D&D podcast with Grace. And it's a great way to support the channel. So thank you. But for now, why don't we switch gears into some advice for role-playing NPCs in general that we can apply to Dragon of Icespire Peak, and hopefully that our viewers can apply to any adventure that they're going to run in the future.
So I think one of the strongest aspects to this adventure is actually their sidekicks. Now you know the sidekicks card actually gives you, I think it's 3 different points on their personality, ideals, bonds, flaws. Those 3 points are really, really useful. I wish they had done that for the NPCs. They'd produced like a quick, short, just like the sidekicks, because that was really smart on their part. Because unlike the Lost Mine of Phandelver, there is potential in Dragon of Icespire Peak for some of these characters to be fantastic characters for a fantasy world rather than somebody who lives down your street. So to go with that, I would go with Sly Flourish. He's got a really good solution. It will take a little bit of practice, but you can get a thing called Rory's Story Cubes. And the idea is that once you have a name, and you have a name, at least they give you a name for most of the NPCs, right? Roll 3 or 4 of these, and that will give you an idea. Those little images on the dice will give you an idea of what the NPC is like. Now, you can marry them up with something like the personality traits, ideals, bonds, and flaws that we use for our characters, or you might use them as motivation, or you might call them something else, whatever sort of works. It does take a little bit of practice. I don't think you can sort of just pick up the dice and go with it. My suggestion is grab those dice and play the game with somebody a few times so that you get the brain working. Number 2, going back to the idea of backgrounds, is maybe go and look at the player's handbook and some of the other supplements. Then you can roll the dice to pick out their personality traits, ideals, bonds, and flaws. You could do it that way, or rather than roll the dice, maybe select the ones that you like the most. Otherwise, if you feel like you have plenty of time, and I've even experienced Dungeon Masters, will take a lot of time to actually build out characters and NPCs. It's not a quick process. You spend a lot of time on the toilet, driving to work, back and forth, all those spare breaks you have at work, trying to figure out what the heck this character's doing in the story, and then jotting them down or memorizing them and then writing them in some sort of document later on. That's sort of the world of an experienced dungeon master. That can take weeks. So if you've got that time frame, sweet. Otherwise, you could hold off on running Dragon of Icespire Peak for, say, 2 or 3 years. Would that be all right with you, Bob? And we'll make a guide for every single NPC, unless, of course, we go completely insane. We've had quite enough of Dragon of Icespire.
Yeah, something like that. And I really like the point you brought up about the cards. You can literally replace Toblin Stonehill with that, say, Pickled Pete guy. Make him Pickled Pete Stonehill, and now it's his inn, and now you have some information maybe for that NPC and art of what he actually looks like. I think those cards actually might make a good resource for DMs running this module, because you're not going to use all 9 sidekicks probably, unless your party really just runs through them quickly.
Yeah. No, I think that's really good advice, and certainly it would be something I would suggest doing. So I can back that up 100%. I think it's a great idea.
Awesome. So I guess one other thing I'll mention, I plugged it very briefly in my Phandalin video, but there's a website that I've used just called NPC Generator that can allow you to come up with random information for NPCs. So it works similarly to those Rory's dice that you mentioned from Sly Flourish as well, where you're just going to come up with some traits that you can improvise on and expand and kind of go with the ones you like and change ones you don't. In that way, hopefully end up with a module full of fun NPCs that aren't too fantastic to overshadow the characters and aren't too boring, and they'll stay interested in your adventure.
Exactly.
So we've talked about the Manticore's motivations, ditching the job board, exaggerating voices and other traits, and resources for generating those traits. But I'd love to hear in the comments who was your group's favorite NPCs and your best tips for making these characters shine. Now subscribe to How To D&D, and thank you to all of the new Bob World Builder patrons. Connor, Llama Supporter 7000, Teak, Marcelo, Vima Miniatures, Colin, Sedzilla, Thomas, Derek, Luke, Kyle, Carol Ann, and Snotty. Thank you for all your support, and keep building.